Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 33. I'm very excited to share today's episode with you. I'm speaking with someone who I deeply admire and who's been a really important part of my creative journey. He's been a huge inspiration to me, and I feel very, very lucky to have had the chance to chat with him for this podcast. I'm speaking with Gregory. Danny has many different strings to his creative and professional bow. He is, among other things, a podcaster, a sketchbook artist, author, and the co-founder of Sketchbook School. Sketchbook School is an online creative hub, and it's filled with courses and workshops and a thriving creative community. Danny is the author of more than a dozen books on art and creativity, including Art Before Breakfast, The Creative License, and Shut Your Monkey. This interview touches on different aspects of Danny's work, but focuses on how we can turn down the volume on the inner critic and free ourselves up to make more art. Let's listen. Danny, thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute joy and an honor.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here as well. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so I have known, you don't know me, but I've known you for a lot of years because I have been part of your sketchbook school. So very, very long time ago, 2014, you launched something called Sketchbook School, which is an online art school. And I was there from the beginning. The first class was called Beginnings, and it was an amazing joy. It had the biggest thing that I took away from it was the community. You just had such a beautiful community feel, bucket loads of inspiration, art making every day. And so that was my experience of Sketchbook School, but I'd love for you to tell the audience about Sketchbook School.
Yes, so I'm glad that that's your takeaway, because that is the most important part. You know, we are all, particularly this year, with the pandemic and all, we're all kind of locked in our own little boxes. But I think as artists, that's often the case. It's funny, I've spoken to a lot of my friends who are artists and illustrators, and I've said, like, how's this year been? And they all say, yeah, but basically the same as ever, you know? And I think, yeah, that's probably true. You sit at your desk or your drawing table inside, and you hardly ever see anybody. So Sketchbook School from the beginning was about, no matter where you are, you want to find other people who are kind of on the same journey. That's the way I see it. We're all on this journey. We're going, I don't know where we're going, but we're experimenting, we're playing, we're doing all these things. So it's nice to have other people with you. So I think a lot of us, when we kind of get this itch to start making art again, our first impulse is, well, I should go and buy some art supplies, right? Another one is, I should buy a few books on how to draw, blah, blah, blah. And another is, I should take a class. So, and I think we take classes primarily not to learn so much, but to be kind of in the groove, to be forced into it, right? To be trying stuff.
Exactly.
And, yeah, to have a reason to show up. And so with Sketchbook School from the beginning, what we really liked was that very first course that you took, Beginnings. We would release another kind of section of that class every week. And so everybody who was taking the class, in the first class there were about 2,000 people all taking it together, and then everybody was excited about it, and they were discussing what they saw, and they did their homework, and they posted it, and then another week would start out. And each week was a different teacher, a totally different topic, and that was really fun. It was really fun. It was different. I think it got people drawing, and it also got them over this hump of perfectionism that we all have, which is like, right? Because you sit down and you go, I'm just not good enough, or this isn't any good. When you're changing things up and you're playing, you don't have time to worry about that stuff. You're just like, what is the next thing? Let's do the next thing. Let's do the next thing. So that's really was the idea from the beginning, is how do we keep people moving? How do we keep people sharing and engaging and playing? And that's kind of we've been doing for 8 years now. We did about 25 classes like that, courses. So, about 50,000 people now have taken these classes. And we've just built this community because there's a lot of people who, just took one class after the other. Then they joined what was originally a Facebook group and then became our community and so on. So, yeah. So there's a lot more to the story, but maybe we'll get to that. But that's kind of the basic setup. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I just listened to a podcast that you did talking with Kosha, your co-founder, all about the history. And it was so fun to hear the history of Sketchbook School and to see how it evolved and how also, like you've said in the past, like put something out there and then iterate. And so Sketchbook School now is very different from how it was back then.
Right.
And it's bursting with all sorts of workshops now. And yeah, you've gone through the process of iterating, finding what works, stitching what doesn't work. And I just love seeing what you're doing now. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's changed. Technology's evolved. Our familiarity with technology has changed too, right? So when we started in 2013, 2014, a lot of people didn't have smartphones at that time, right? And also, it was also the beginning of people really being familiar with video online, having the bandwidth, having all that stuff, so you can really stream a video without being, stopping and starting. So that's kind of where we started, and then from there, the technology evolved to the point where we could start doing big live events, which is what we've been doing now. So we've been doing workshops. As it happened, we started to plan our workshops just before the pandemic, a couple months before, which turned out to be like the perfect thing for people who are stuck at home. You suddenly could be in a big thing. We're actually doing one tomorrow where 700 or 800 people will all gather on Saturday morning, and we'll all be together and we'll all learn from an artist. We'll spend 2 or 3 hours together drawing. And this has also led to the new thing that we're doing, which is called Spark. And Spark is a membership program. Because another thing that struck me as we've been evolving over time is you want to work with people over time. You don't want to just like jump in and see them briefly. And you also don't want to just comment on their work. We've all had that experience of like you post something on Instagram or you post on Facebook and there's some likes and there's like, oh my God, that's so good. But we want to kind of go beyond that
the
and
depth
say,
of engagement. Yeah.
Right. Let's have a proper conversation that helps me to really understand what I've made, understand how I could improve it. What do you see in it that I'm missing? And a lot of times we don't have people around us who we can ask. You can ask, your family and they might say, yeah, whatever, dinner's on the table. Or they might say, how much money are you spending on art supplies? Yeah. Or they might say, oh my God, you're so good. You should quit your job and start selling drawings in the street, whatever it is. But when you're with other people who are on the journey that we were talking about before, they know what it's like and they can say, yeah, speaking to you as a friend, this is what I would suggest. And because I know you, because I get to see you on a regular basis, I see how you evolve. So that's what Spark has become. It's become this thing where we meet literally twice a day. We have an event that people can come to and draw together. We bring in artists who do tours of their studio. They do demonstrations. It's just constant, just of making stuff. So the different elements that we have, the courses you can take by yourself, the workshop you can take with a giant crowd of people, or these smaller things where you or with like 20, 25 people, who you know. So it's all helping to make more art, which is the most important thing. Lots of people making lots of art.
So today I want to share your story with the Nature Journal community. My listeners are nature journalists, and there's a huge crossover between what you do and what nature journalists do. And I'd love to explore that. And so nature journaling is similar to what you do. We draw in a sketchbook or on a piece of paper. It doesn't matter. We're making art. But we are focused on nature. And so it's all about closely observing, being attentive to what you're looking at, and capturing observations of nature on paper using words, pictures, and numbers. It's the same, but we are focused on nature. And I'd love especially to talk to you about art and freeing ourselves from the hang-ups about art, which is a big thing for everybody who is in any creative habit. I listened to something you said on a podcast once, and you said, yeah, you threw it out there. When I was 8, I was a full-time artist. And I just love this because it's true, isn't it? Like, we all were just free back then. There was none of these hang-ups. And yeah, I'd love to talk about your beginnings. Did you have creative people around you when you were young?
Not especially, no. I mean, I moved a lot when I was a kid. And, you know, my mom became sort of creative on and off now. I mean, actually, she actually did stuff with leaves. She created these things called leafages, where she combined calligraphy and leaves. But that was only much, much later, like after she retired. When I was a kid, not really. I mean, I was sort of left to my own devices. So I wasn't encouraged. I wasn't discouraged. I had teachers who, particularly when I was younger, who were, you know, indifferent, or some, you know, I had like one teacher who was kind of who was like very rules oriented when it came to art making, and it was like, you have to do it this way. And I kind of couldn't follow the rules all the time, so I got in trouble for that. And then when I was in high school, I had a couple of art teachers who I liked, but, you know, art making was something that I certainly felt an inclination towards, but I was terrified of being an artist. No way was I going to go down that road of starving in a garret, you know, dying of like syphilis that I had caught from my my model girlfriend, and, you know, all the things that we've seen, you know, happen to the great artists in Paris in the 19th century. So yeah, no, I was terrified of ruining my future by being an artist, and so I studied political science, and yeah, I didn't do that at all. And I came to art later on, really only in my late 30s when I started to make art again.
I was thinking about Jack, your son, who has watched you making art every day for his life, and he grew up and he became an artist, or he went to art school. Do you think you're normalizing art and art habit in daily life encouraged Jack in that direction, or was that independent of you?
I don't think he would like me to take credit, but
not to take credit, just to say, like, it normalize when you normalize something, when you see role models or just people in your life doing something, it becomes normal.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I always said to him, you know, making art is fun, making art is part of life, and, you know, let's just play and make stuff. Yeah. I never was clear on how that would actually turn into a job or not. And that's the big divide, is like, we start, I mean, like I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying, it's time for me to get serious about my art, and, you know, I have to figure out, like, you know, should I be showing it, this and that. And I was like, well, why don't you get serious about your art by just like making a lot of art? Let's start there and see where it goes. It doesn't have to be your job. And I think the fact that it's jobs and money and responsibility and all that gets wrapped up in it, that is, and it's not even actually that happens, it's the fear of that happening.
Yes.
So it's like we're a long, long way before we're quitting our jobs, but we're still thinking about it. And then you say, I'm not even going to like draw a stick figure because I might have to quit my job.
Yeah. And get syphilis and die in a...
There you go, exactly. It's a terrible, terrible malady.
Well, let's talk about fear, because you have a book which I absolutely love. It's called Shut Your Monkey, How to Control Your Inner Critic and Get More Done. And this book, well, let's start from the beginning. Can you tell people what you mean by the monkey? And then also, like, what your monkey sounds like, what your monkey looks like.
Well, the monkey, everybody has this voice, unless the only people who don't have a voice in their head that tells them, maybe you shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that, are sociopaths and psychopaths. They have no limiter. But the rest of us have a voice in our heads that says, don't do that, you'll die, or you'll put your eye out, don't run with scissors, all that kind of stuff. So we all have these voices. And when it comes to being creative, those voices get particularly shrill. Those voices, right? They're the voices that are saying, you're no good, you have no talent, or, all the consequences. And that voice is something that's actually a very important part of our survival, because it's the thing that sort of protects or makes us aware of new things. Like, this is new, this is unknown. Don't eat that.
Be a
don't
bit
go
wary.
near that. Right, something bad can happen. But the problem is that then we're big enough to not eat, bad plants, and not play, not jump off the roof. We get old enough so we don't really need that, but it's so powerful because it's saving our lives that it's in there nonetheless, and it continues to plague us. And when it comes to creative things, what is the one of the key things about being an artist, being a creative person? Making something new.
Yes.
Right? So as soon as you make something new, the monkey, which is what I call that voice in your head, jumps up and is like, what are you doing? And just gets in the way. So it says, don't change your life. Stay how you are. Even if you're miserable, it doesn't really matter. It's better than being dead.
It's
so
safer.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's safe. And so, where does that voice come from? Sometimes it's maybe the voice of your parents. It may be the voice of a teacher. It may be just the voice of something that was put into us millions of years ago that saved us. But it's a problem. And I mean, my voice is variable. I wrote this book called Shut Your Monkey. It's not called Kill Your Monkey. Stop. You can't really kill it, but you can create situations where you go, I have to distract you, or I have to sort of just moderate what you're saying and decide how seriously I'm going to take it. There's a lot of strategies that you can develop to allow yourself to try new things, to accept imperfection, which is another big problem that we all have, and the monkey wants everything to be perfect, or else don't even bother, and that can stop you from even starting, because you go, well, I can never do it perfectly.
Yes. And I like that, what you said. It's not about killing the monkey. It's about calming him down a little bit.
Giving him something else to play with, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Not about abolishing the inner critic. It's always going to be there. It's helped us survive, as you said. But not attending to it, tuning it down a little bit. And I love the book because it's all about tuning down the monkey by making art. Just keep going. Just make more art, and then he'll be a bit more quiet.
Hopefully, yeah. I think you can distract him. You can say, we'll judge it later.
Yes.
And there's ways of saying, like, yeah, I hear you. No, this is terrible what I'm doing. I know, and we'll talk about it later on, but just like, let me just finish this part. And then meanwhile, could you go over there and like audit my taxes, or can you go over there and like worry about this other thing? And meanwhile, like, I promise you this, I'm not taking this seriously. It's not important. It's not good. I'm not going to, go off the deep end.
I have a friend, and we were talking about the inner critic, and she showed me this picture that she had painted, and she said her inner critic she doesn't consider it an inner critic. She considers it this horrible, mean bully, because obviously her monkey is really noisy. And she showed me this picture that she'd illustrated of her bully, her monster, she called it. And oh my goodness, had this gleeful grin with teeth coming down, and its eyes were glinting, and it had this hideous like folds of skin and little wizened up hands. And I actually showed it to my young son, and he screamed when he saw this little monster. And I love that. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's not, inner critic sounds like something quite civilized, right. But it can be really violent, this horrible voice, can't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it can ruin your life. It can stop you from doing anything. It can cause you to be intensely depressed. It can certainly kill you your dreams. That it can do, right? It can stop you from saying, here's this thing you wanted to do. And it will, and also it also takes any possible criticism that's out there, any slight, like somebody looks at you like, anything like that, and it will say, you see?
Yeah.
And turn up the volume on that.
I told you.
Right.
Everybody
exactly.
hates you.
Exactly. You're terrible. I told you were no good. And so suddenly it's constantly looking for reinforcement of its position. And so that's why you have to look for reinforcement of your position, so you have to start to say, you know what, I'm actually good at these things. I actually have a lot of accomplishments. I'm not as hopelessly, terrible at everything as you make it seem. And you can have conversations with it, but also it can be like, just an annoying pest, and that you don't indulge, and you say, you know what, go over there and leave me alone for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I know you've done workshops with people of all ages, and you have worked with young people, children, about making art. And I'm really interested. I know it's going to be different for everybody, but have you noticed a trend in like the age when the monkey starts waking up, when the monkey starts hassling people?
Yeah, it's actually not different for different people. You are a joyous, creative person until you're about 8, 9, maybe 10. Then hormones start to kick in, and you start to become acutely aware of your peers. So it's, what we call the tweens. You start to enter that age where you're suddenly really worried about what other people think and what other people your age, and you're constantly looking for signals that will tell you what they think of you. And then hopefully by the time you're like in your late teens and you're starting to make decisions for yourself about your life, you start to regain control. You're not just driven by peer pressure, but yeah, that period, and that's the period that you start to associate art making with being a baby, coloring in, drawing with crayons, making silly paintings. And then in high school, like you might be like the cool kid or the cool weird kid, or the emo kid, whatever it is, who can sort of draw. Hey, would you draw me a thing? I can have it as a tattoo, whatever. But I think you get to, you can get a little bit of social traction with making art again.
If you're the artsy one, yeah.
Yeah, but you might still be the weirdo, and it may still be a reject because of it. But, it's very unusual to see kids 11, 12, 13 feeling comfortable with making stuff. I mean, there are exceptions, of course, but yeah, that's the tough age, and most of us don't come back from that. So 5, 6, 7, 8, universal. I mean, I go into a class with kids that age, and I'll say, hey, let's draw this. I'll come up with assignments, and I'll say, okay, let's draw a hippopotamus driving a sports car while playing a banjo. No problem. Off they go and do it. You say that to
Whereas
anybody
if you
else,
said that to adults, they'd be like,
no,
what?
You could say that to a professional illustrator. They'd be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What kind of car? Sports car? Yeah. So at that age, it's just like, fine. Who cares? Let's just do it. And yeah, that's what I want to be. I mean, I think, Picasso wanted to be it too. It's like we want to get back to that age of just like, I don't care. I'm going to make stuff. I'm going to create a world. I remember my son like drawing armies and, spaceships and all that stuff. It's like a piece of paper is just like your universe. You can make anything you want on it. You have control. It's really great. And as adults, we can do that too.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this and I was wondering, like, what would the world be if we didn't go through that phase, if the monkey didn't wake up for us? And can you imagine, like, there would just be so much art everywhere.
There would be, but there would be like no banks and no insurance companies. There wouldn't be a lot. There would be a lot of things that wouldn't be. So
yes,
yeah,
you're right.
I mean, yeah. So it's probably better snap out of it and get to work.
Well, I wonder. So there's this age, the kids start to lose that, and maybe that's just a natural phase and we need it. We're learning other things at that age. I was going to ask you, like, what can we as educators do to help guide kids through this? And maybe we don't need to. Maybe it's okay just to let them take a break.
I think it's hard because also what happens when you do if you do say to an 11 or 12-year-old, do a drawing, they really want to make it look real. And they don't necessarily have the skills to do that, because when you're drawing from your imagination, it doesn't really matter. There's skills about looking and translating what you see into lines on paper that you need to some extent to have stuff pointed out to you. What's negative space? How does lighting work? Those kinds of things. Not extensive. And there are books, like there's an amazing book called Drawing with Children by Mona Brooks, which is about breaking down what you see into almost like an alphabet of drawing. So, if you think about it You can draw anything if you use straight lines, curved lines, circles, angles, filled in organic shapes, not filled in organic shape. So you can break it down to like, half a dozen elements, and then you can say, okay, let's look at this thing and let's break it down into its bits. And so it's like learning an alphabet, and kids at that age are, they just did learn the alphabet. So they're totally open to that. And they can also have really amazing results. I mean, you can teach a kid this in one session. You can take a piece of reference and you can say, all right, I'll show you how to break it down. We'll copy it step by step. You'll walk away with a drawing of a horse and it'll look really good. And you couldn't have done that an hour ago. And then they've got that as a thing. They need to obviously keep practicing it, rehearsing, working on it, internalizing it, but you can make an incredible change. It's almost like the equivalent of not being able to read and suddenly being able to read that way. I think a lot of people don't learn that way. And what happens is, here you are, you're 40, and you sit down to draw, and you haven't drawn since you were 8, right? And you pick up a pencil and you basically draw like you were 8.
Yeah.
Or maybe not even as good, because when you were 8, you were drawing all day. Now you haven't drawn in 32 years. You sit down, you draw something. It looks like a kid bad kid did it. And they say, oh, see, I have no talent.
I can't, I never could draw. I can't draw. Yeah, you're right. Because of course you can't, because you haven't done it for 4
You haven't
years.
drawn. It's not that you can't, you don't.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So it's like so many other skills that we can have. You just need to learn a few basic things and practice them, and you'll do it. We all can.
Yeah.
And we all did.
Yeah, we did. And there's this funny thing that happens, like adults, maybe they forget that. Maybe they forget they were doing it as a kid, but then they say, I can't draw a straight line, I'm hopeless, I can't draw a stick figure. I've heard this so many times in workshops, and people start to freak out when you bring out pens and watercolor. And there's this perception, it's like, and people say it to people who draw, they say, you have the art gene. I don't have it, I'm hopeless. Talent. Yeah, but what is this about art? Why do people think you have art talent or you don't? Whereas they don't think you can pick up a violin and play it without practicing. But they do think that about art. Or driving. Imagine if someone said, I don't drive because I just don't have the driving talent. It doesn't make sense. Why do people have this perception about art?
Well, we know how to drive because we need to drive, right? So that's why we drive. We don't need to draw. You can get through your life without drawing. You need to cook, right? You need to make an omelet. You need to know some basic things about cooking. So you do, because you need to eat. Do you need to play the violin? You don't, so you don't. And you look at it and you go, yeah, it's partly talent, but boy, it's really difficult. And I think when it comes to drawing, there's a few things that are going on. I think society in general doesn't want to encourage it. And I mean, not to get too Marxist about it, but the fact is that art is a commodity in our culture that people buy and sell. And its value comes from its scarcity and from the scarcity of the people who are acknowledged to do it. So, there are drawings and paintings that sell for millions of dollars because there aren't many people who do them, and there aren't many people who said they're good enough to sell for that amount. So we kind of have this culture that says art is for artists and only for really good artists, and there's all these kinds of values associated with it, and there's a market for it. So in general, our society doesn't particularly want everybody walking around drawing, because then suddenly, we'd have, and similarly with music, it's like you can sing in the shower, you can maybe play, I don't know, imagine all, you can play songs on the guitar, some basic stuff, right? But you're not going to go and like become a musician and try and like get a recording contract. So, but I think music is also of a social thing. So maybe there's a bit more tolerance, because like we all sing in church or we all sing around the campfire. So there's a bit more of that. But when it comes to art making, maybe we make art when we have little kids in the house, right? So you sit down and draw with your kid. So there's a little bit of that. But again, it doesn't seem like something that we need to learn to do. But the reality is that if you learn some basic things about drawing, you will learn to see the world around you in a clearer way. And that's the big difference, right? And certainly when you're drawing nature, if you want to, and I think particularly with nature drawing, because naturalists have always drawn, explorers have always drawn, right? Cartographers have always drawn, surgeons draw nature in the sense of drawing anatomy. So we've always used drawing as a way of understanding, how the veins in a leaf are arranged, understanding how a tree is built, understanding a landscape. Those things come from drawing. And so you can do a drawing and you can keep a nature journal to record the birds that you see in your backyard, to record what the clouds look like in the sky on a particular day, to record the changes of nature over the seasons. All those things are a way of slowing down and saying, let me observe this thing and understand that this leaf is different from a leaf from another tree because of how many points there are on the leaf and all those things. So with drawing can be an observation tool, not necessarily something that's going to hang in a gallery or be auctioned. We're not entering that whole world. We're using it to understand. And that, when we were 4, 5, 6, 7, and we were first learning to draw, that's how we were using drawing, to understand the world around us, to say, like, this is what a house looks like, this is what a dog looks like. We may not be able to write yet, but we were able to translate our reality into things on the paper that we're drawing. So again, with nature, how else would we do it? How else would you, you could take pictures, I guess, but it wouldn't be the same. That wouldn't help you to understand it. So,
yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And writing about it's one way, but there's something really deep that happens when you study it with your eyes, with your pen, when you put it on the page in that way. Yeah, people have been doing that for centuries to learn, to understand more, and you really do go deeply into that. And I love that I've heard you make the distinction between art with a big A and art with a little a. And we need to get rid of art with the big A I don't mean that. We need art with the big A. It's very important.
Burn down the museums.
I just mean, like, you don't have to, people who are fearing, I can't start because I can't make art. It's not about that. It's about making art with a little a, and that can help ease some of those fears.
Yeah, one thing you can say to yourself is, if you're a sculptor, if you make sculptures, you're a sculptor. And if you make paintings, you're a painter. But what are you if you make drawings? It's not really a thing. It's not a job, right? I'm a draftsman, but that's not really a thing either. So you could just say to yourself, you know what? If I'm drawing, it can't possibly be a job. Like, I don't have to worry about that. I can just draw. I make drawings. I'm a drawing. It's not my identity. And so if it's not your identity, then, you don't have to be so worried about it. And you don't have to dress a certain way or color your hair. You don't have to do any of those things. You can just say, I draw. It's like I play tennis. I'm not a tennis player, but so I think we can just take off some of the pressure and instead say, this is a tool to help me know my place in the universe, to understand where I fit, and what's going on around me, and not walk around with my nose in my phone all the time, not be in a dream world, but be present, anchored in the world of nature. I've been thinking so much about it this year because I moved from living in a giant city. I still live in a giant city, but now I have a garden. I used to live in an apartment building. And so living in a garden, I've been watching birds. We have so many birds here in Arizona. And I've been watching mockingbirds, doves, quails, hawks, lovebirds we have all these birds, and I can sit in the garden and I can watch. There's like I would say 40 birds who are regular visitors to the thing, and I sort of start to know them. I'm definitely aware of the season. So all this time being in lockdown, that's been my community, is to see that. And I've often thought, these birds have no idea there's a pandemic going on.
Yes,
right? They're just like living their life. They're just doing their thing.
Yes, and I've noticed that nature journaling as a community, as a thing that people do, has just skyrocketed through this period.
Sure.
And I think there's a bunch of reasons. I think people have the time, a bit more time, especially in lockdown. I also think that people need something to hang on to, and nature is always there. And I've reflected on this a bit about how there's something so safe about nature because it doesn't care about the ups and downs of our dramas. It doesn't care about a global pandemic. It's just doing its thing. The seasons are changing. The birds are coming. The birds are going. And I think there's a real safety in that. And maybe that's one of the reasons why people are coming to nature journaling at this time.
I think so. I think also the pandemic has reminded us that nature's bigger than us. This virus is part of nature, right? Nature created it. And, it's taken us a while to get a grip on it. But we, we've taken nature for granted, and all the things that are going on with climate change and so forth. We've been ignoring nature. We haven't been supporting nature. And guess what? Nature can just can decide, and nature can come back and say, nope, we're in charge. And so if we're oblivious to it, we're at enormous risk. Going back to the monkey, it's like we need a monkey. We need the monkey is part of nature too, and we need to acknowledge our place in the universe and have a little bit less hubris, be a little bit more modest, and say, you know what? Yeah, I have to fit into this. I'm not just the king of the jungle. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah, you're right. It's sort of, sometimes I think of the ocean. I'm really connected with the ocean on a heart level, and sometimes when I'm floating in the ocean, it feels like a parent, and I feel
like it's holding you up. Yeah,
like it's holding you, but also it keeps you in line. A parent can say, don't go there, it's dangerous. And the ocean does that. This is the safe place. This is where I'm going to protect you. And if you go out of these boundaries, this is where it's unsafe, because the ocean can be very unsafe. In Australia, there's dangerous rips and whatnot, and it sort of checks you. This is the limit. This is where you're safe, and I'm going to keep you here. And I think nature can do that to us too. We get too big for our boots, and nature can bring us back, like a parent, guide you. This is where you have to be. This is the safe place.
Right. And if we ignore it, which we do most of the time,
yeah,
or we sentimentalize it a lot, and we anthropomorphize it. We do all these things to try to control it, to try to control nature, and to say, well, we're, or we don't recognize its unpredictability too. So there are all these things that happen that because we're disconnected. I started blogging in 2003. And the reason I started blogging was actually because of nature journaling. Because I had a friend, Richard Bell, who is, does this blog called Wild Yorkshire.
Yes.
So, Richard, I really loved Richard's blog. And he said to me, why don't you just do a blog? And I said, so I started my blog. The very first few posts that I wrote were for one person. It was for Richard. Because he was the only person I knew who might even be vaguely interested. So I was just sort of started writing for that, because what he was doing with his blog, what was so interesting was it was a journal, of course, because it's a blog, but so much of it was about I just saw this in my garden, or I've noticed this pattern, or now I'm going to focus on this particular plant. And he did so much work, and still does, just on this little tiny garden. And I went to Yorkshire to visit him. I was like, cool. Wait a minute, this garden is 4 square feet. This is what this thing is, where you've been pulling all these stories out.
Oh, wow.
It was really amazing. It wasn't like some sort of massive thing. It was very small, and he was such an astute observer of what's going on there, because he draws, and he can draw so many different kinds of things so beautifully, and and he made me stop and think. And I did a fair amount of sort of nature drawing when I was with him, but it's so easy to get disconnected, but it's also so fascinating to get reconnected to it. And I think about there's a book I have that was written in the 20s. I'm trying to remember the name of it right now, but it's a fishing diary that this woman kept. Where she would go fishing in Scotland, I think it was, And she had this book that was like a log book that you use for fishing, you know, where you write down what I caught and so forth. But while she was fishing, she would do watercolors and drawings of the fish that she caught and also just of the nature around it. Muriel Foster. And they reproduced that book. Comes in a little box. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's a total reproduction of that thing. And it's this one book that she kept over 30 or 40 years of fishing. And again, it was the same thing when I thought, she's really, I just didn't even realize that there were this many fish, or that they looked so beautiful, or that you could do so many different things with them. Yeah, so that kind of thing, it's like nature is all there, and you can live your life and never notice it. And then if you stop and you suddenly say, there's so much to see and engage with and record and analyze and track, it's fascinating, and drawing is just the best tool for doing that.
Yes, and it's an infinite rabbit hole. Like, you can just go into it, like you say, in one small section of garden in Yorkshire. It can give you 40, 50, 60 years, a lifetime of fascinating discovery. I love that so much.
Yeah, or by contrast, Lewis and Clark. So, you know, Lewis and Clark, the explorers, right? So Lewis did, I think it was Lewis, might have been Clark, but I think it was Lewis. He did these really amazing illustrated journals as they were traveling across America, going, you know, from east to west, and going to places that nobody had ever been before. And similarly, like, his drawings are just fascinating. And he, I'm sure, would never have thought of himself as an artist. It was just like in the 19th century, that was like a standard thing. People just knew how to do it. You didn't think about that. And it's just, if you have a chance, just Google them. There's just amazing drawings of things, species that he found that had never been seen before and stuff like that. It was really cool.
That is cool. So I came to nature journaling years ago through a really difficult period in my life. I was very, very unwell, going through a whole lot of stuff physically and emotionally. And it was really important to me. It was the best thing that I could have found, because it focused me, it calmed me during this time. It just calmed my whole body, and it gave me a focus. And I know that you started drawing again in your late 30s during a really difficult tragedy in your life and your family. And I wonder if you're able to speak a little about how art has been something that's helped you through the intensity of challenges in life.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like a lot of creative people. I live in my head. You know, I live in my head a lot. And particularly when difficult things happen and the future is unclear, it's easy to live in your head, right? It's easy to say, I'm going to make up what I think is going to happen and work through all these terrible scenarios. So one day, after looking for I was basically trying to find the meaning of life in various forms. And I sort of stumbled into drawing. I just had this impulse to draw something. And it was the interior of my medicine cabinet. And what I found was that it helped me to get out of my head. It helped me to realize that when I draw, like, I'm actually here. Like, this is actually happening. I'm actually here.
Yeah.
And so I can get through this by drawing. And it's funny, at the beginning of the pandemic, for a long time, my wife and I were here. We got stranded out in Arizona. We live in New York. And we went away for a long weekend and got stuck out here. And when we were here, like, there was a point where we had this thing about the simulation. I think it's like a reasonably common thing that people have had during the pandemic, where you think, is this whole thing a simulation? Like, we thought, did the plane crash that we were in, and like we're actually like brains in a lab somewhere, and they're feeding us this experience because we're in this backyard and there are birds, but there are no people. So, and we kept thinking about it as this computer simulation. Not seriously, but sort of seriously. But I found that, like, sitting and drawing birds, drawing the 2 pomegranate trees I have, drawing, clouds, stars, all those kinds of things, helped me to realize, like, this is not a simulation. You don't have to constantly obsess with what's going to happen. Is the world over? Are we all ruined? You can say, let me just be like that bird, and it's a beautiful day, and let me enjoy it, and let me be present here now. Does it matter if I did a great drawing of the bird? Of course not. It's not. The act of drawing. It's drawing. It's a gerund, right? It's a present activity, drawing. You're here in the present. You're drawing. You're doing this process. You're being here now. You're engaged with this thing. You're seeing it. You're feeling it. You're being anchored. And that helped me to get out of living in my head for that time. That's really its purpose, for me.
Yeah, I think it's super relevant now. During the pandemic, people are seeing tragedy everywhere. Life is changing. It's easy, like you say, to live in your head and also forget that you're actually here, because we can get so intensely in our heads that it becomes our reality. And for me, back then, when I was going through a whole lot of stuff and a lot of anxiety, I tried, people say, try meditating. And for me, that was the worst thing to do, because I was so close
inside your head.
You're inside your head. That was super scary and super unhelpful, because it intensified all my problems. But drawing, it was like mindfulness, but a back door into mindfulness, if that makes sense. Like, I was completely present, and yet I wasn't having to confront any like gaping void of like, I don't know, meditation when you're in an intense sort of anxious period in your life can be really scary. And so it was like mindfulness, but in a roundabout way. And I think that's what you're describing as well, like just anchoring in the present moment in a simple way.
I mean, there's a book that I read early on when I first started to draw by an author named Frederick Frank, Franck.
Oh, yes. I love this book, The Zen of Seeing.
It's The Zen of Seeing, exactly. So The Zen of Seeing, Frederick Frank was, he was actually he worked with Dr. Albert Schweitzer in Africa. So, he was a German doctor, I think. Anyway, so Frederick Frank, I took a workshop. I've hardly ever taken any workshops, but for some reason I was just so obsessed with Frederick Frank that I because his books are all handwritten. They're all in the kind of yellowish paper with brown ink, and these drawings that are kind of weird and spidery. There's a certain kind of aspect to these drawings that are kind of strange. And he was really old at that time, so he wasn't teaching workshops anymore. But he had acolytes that went out and taught the sort of Zen of Seeing kinds of things. And this woman who's teaching the thing, she said, let's start by, you could either draw a leaf or you could draw the lines on your hand. So you just start tracing the lines on your hand, and he's like really, really as close as you can possibly be to them. Like, here's a line, and then there's another little tiny line that comes off it, and then it crosses another line, and you just start. I mean, if you start drawing the lines on your hand, you could spend like half an hour doing it, right? Same with the leaves, the veins on a leaf. See the smallest thing you can possibly see, and recognize that it's not like they're perfect Ys that come off another one. They're not. They're all slightly different. And just get into that, move into that thing of seeing these lines and reproducing them. And then it's like, I can't draw. Well, that's nothing to do with drawing, right? It's just doing this thing, doing this exercise, and you see intensely. So, yeah.
Yes. That's a beautiful book worth checking out. I'll link that in the show notes.
Please do.
But yeah, I love what you said. It's not about drawing, it's about doing drawing. And maybe that's where it is. Maybe that's where the distinction. I think we get really hung up on these labels, like even drawing has its own weight, Certainly the word artist has a weight. I had this real big hang up for so long about saying that I'm an artist, and I don't think we even have to say that. But it's partly because of sketchbook school that I am able to say that, and I'll tell you the reason why. So I had never called myself an artist. I've been making artwork for a really long time, but never ever used that word for myself. And even I was recalling something that happened. I went to a poetry book launch. The poet was there reading from his poetry book, and I bought the book, and I was really excited to meet the poet. I went up to him and I said, "Can you sign my book?" And he said, "Sure, I can. Do you have a pen?" And I searched around in my bag, and I pulled out one of those woodless graphite pencils that you use I think I was using it for life drawing classes at that time. And he said, "Oh, you're an artist." And I panicked. I was like, no, I make art, but no, I'm not an artist. And my mum was there and she grabbed me behind my neck and she said, yes, she's an artist. She makes beautiful stuff. And that I just remember that because I panicked. It was like, no, this label like felt really heavy. And and then but the thing that pushed me over to be able to say that or think that about myself was sketchbook school, because I remember I started your classes, and at that time I was really unwell. I was sort of had my own confinement, my own, pandemic in my house. I was stuck there. But I had this community and I had this amazing opening to art, and I had my stuff out on my kitchen table, and every day I would go there. Every day I was watching videos, and every day I was making stuff, and I had art supplies just completely covering the entire table, and I was making stuff every day. I was filling up journals, and I remember at that time, 2014, I looked at that table completely covered with stuff, completely covered with art, and I thought, oh gee, maybe that I am an artist. Maybe I can say that. And I don't think we need to say that, but that was the point when I thought, yeah, like if you're making art every day, you're living it, art is coming out of your pen, like when can you say that?
Yeah, I mean, people say, well, when people are buying your stuff and you have a gallery and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I mean, in that case, Van Gogh wasn't an artist, and I don't think anybody would say that, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think, or don't,
Don't, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel comfortable saying it either. And, I in fact did a episode of my podcast where I had an interview with my mother.
Yes, I listened to this. So cool.
Yeah, my
and
mother.
she was saying, no one should say this unless you're selling.
You don't say, no, she said you don't say that about yourself. Other
Okay,
people
yeah.
say it about you. Yeah. You can say you're a painter, but don't say you're an art. It's like saying you're a genius. Who are you to say?
Okay.
But that's, obviously we have different mothers.
And then you had another guest on, and she was like, everyone should call themselves an artist. And she said, if you're walking down the street and you feel like art's coming out of you, you're an artist. She was just the opposite way. And that's cool too.
It's true. Call yourself whatever you like.
Yeah.
No, because it's not really about your label. It's about your actions.
Yes.
It's like if you want to be a writer, then write stuff.
Write stuff. Yeah.
If you want to be a chef, then cook stuff. It's like it's what you do, not what you're called.
Yeah. So you do this thing on Thursdays, and it's called Draw With Me, and you sit with people, whoever wants to turn up, and you do live drawing sessions online, and you have lots of creative ways to spend time making art, and it's loose and it's free and it's silly, and I'd love for you to talk about it.
Yeah, so I do it on YouTube, and it's sort of started because my original idea was, sometimes I feel like drawing, like what if I just was on YouTube when I was doing it? That was kind of the original idea. It's become much more elaborate since then. But basically, it's at the very least, let's draw for 45 minutes once a week. Like, that's not that big of a deal. Just come, watch this thing. Let's draw together. I'll give you something to make. It'll be, maybe good or bad, whatever you do, but we'll spend 45 minutes doing this thing. Why not? What else you got to do? So that's really the idea. And it's always, I try to come up with different things that it is. And I try to tell jokes while we're doing it. So it's meant to be as just a reminder that you can do it. Again, going back to you're 7, you're sitting at the kitchen table, your mom is cooking dinner, you've got crayons, let's just hang out. Yes,
my favorite was when you sketched your self-portrait blindfolded. That was genius.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really fun thing, which is like, can you, a lot of what I'm trying to do is to say, let's break your expectations. Let's give you an excuse for making something dreadful.
Yeah.
Because it's like drawing yourself blindfolded, like, of course it's going to be terrible. So when you're doing it, you're not like, oh my God, what are people going to think of this? You're just like, well, this is going to suck. And then you take your blindfold off and you say, whoa.
That looks really
Actually,
groovy.
that actually is really interesting. And so, you know, what are the things that you can do to do that to yourself? So you just, again, taking off the nonsense that you bring to it, taking off the excuses, the expectations, the perfectionism, all that stuff, and just saying, you know what, just do it. And if you do this on a regular basis, then maybe you can maybe bring in your judgment, because you've gotten to a place where maybe it's worth judging. But right now, do the drawing equivalent of making a grilled cheese sandwich. Just do it. It'll be fun. It'll taste good. You wouldn't open a restaurant with grilled cheese sandwiches. You don't have to be a 4-star grilled cheese sandwich chef. You can just be a guy who made a grilled cheese sandwich and ate it. This is the drawing equivalent of grilled cheese. And who doesn't like grilled cheese? Yeah.
I'm wondering, because you're now connecting in a different way, connecting with people on Zoom, you're doing live things, and I'm wondering, I have found, especially starting this podcast after the pandemic, I've found a whole lot of deep connection through this, through the computer screen. And I'm wondering about your feeling of making connections with people across the world. I know that you sort of did that with Kosha, your partner in Sketchbook School. Like, it was before the pandemic, of course, but this way that we can actually build something really significant virtually, because we are in our own places, but we have this technology for connecting.
Yeah, I mean, this podcast, you and I are having a conversation. We're on opposite sides of the planet.
Yeah.
And you're listening to this through your headphones. And what are you doing right now? Are you in the supermarket? Are you drawing? Are you walking your dog? What are you doing? It's just the three of us. We're here together, you know, in your ears. We're all talking. We're having this conversation. And so we're using this technology. It's not about the technology. It's about the human connection.
Yes.
Connection. And we're able to have a conversation that, honestly, if the three of us were in a coffee shop together, maybe we could have that at a table, maybe. But if we don't really know each other that well, how are we going to start this conversation? And, you know, life gets in the way. We don't really have the right to. So it's, in a weird way, it's a private thing. It's a social thing. It's a technology thing. It's all these different things together. So we're able to connect with each other. And also, if you look around you as you listen to this podcast, probably nobody around you right now is interested in this conversation. You're interested in it. You're still listening 58 minutes or so into this conversation. You're still listening, hopefully. So it's like we're able to find people who share this very niche interest with us and care a lot about this when most people don't. And how would we have ever found each other otherwise? We never would have, except for these ones and zeros flowing through the air.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's about finding your people. And I think that's why Sketchbook School is so wonderful, because you find your people, you find the people who love the same things, and that's why it's so joyous.
Yeah, it's a tribe of broken misfit toys, yeah. No, I think, I've met so many people who, at first you think, well, we would have nothing in common, right? And then you find that we have drawing in common. And then you start to find out what else we have in common. So, it's interesting that way, that we're able to be a united network with no agenda. We're not trying to do anything. We're just trying to support each other in doing this, being on this journey.
I think what I take away from all your books and all your courses is that art can be and should be fun, and that art making is a practice that can and should go with you through your whole life. Like, it's not a place you get to, it's a tool for making life better. And I just thank you for that, Danny. It's just an amazing thing that you're putting out there, just freeing people up and allowing play to happen through art.
It's not an opportunity to make yourself feel bad.
Yeah.
It's not a judgment. It's not like, you're no good, or you should have done more of this, or why have you neglected this? It's not about that. It's about just do this thing that you like. Eat a grilled cheese sandwich. Enjoy it. Have fun. Do it. Maybe you'll be really good at it. Maybe you won't. But just keep doing it. It'll change. It's an adventure. There's so many aspects of it. You go into an art supply store, there's so many things you could buy and play with, and any one of them has an infinite number of permutations and combinations to all the others. And then you take something like nature and you say, look at how rich and varied nature is, how much there is to learn about it, how fascinating and fulfilling it is, and how you can spend your whole life watching birds or watching the seasons change. It never gets old. It's always different. And most people don't notice it. You're special. You're special because you're paying attention, and your life is enriched by it. And, you're making connections with other people who happen to have noticed it too. How awesome is that?
Yeah. Danny, thank you so much. It's been an amazing conversation. It's such a joy to chat with you.
Thank you. It was really nice to talk to you too. And I also wanted to say, if anybody would like to try out something at Sketchbook School, one thing that I can give you is to try out Spark, this thing that I've talked about before. Yeah, so I'm going to set up a special thing. We'll call it Nature Podcast. So if you go to sketchbookschool.com/Nature Podcast, let's make it one word. And if you do that, you can try out Spark for a week for free and see if you like it. Yeah, see if you like it, try it out. So go there and you'll learn more about what this is. You can, sign up for it. There's also lots of other things that I do that you can, if you want to listen to my podcast, if you want to read my essays, whatever, there's stuff like that you can find out at dannygregory.com. So.
Yes, fantastic. That's so generous. Thank you. And I'll leave links to all your stuff in the show notes, and we can get people crossing over. The Nature Journal community, I'm sure a lot of my listeners have already been to Sketchbook School or certainly know about you, but we will get some crossing over happening. So thank you so much, Danny. That's really generous.
Sure. I'd love to see you all. And we're getting ready to do a plein air workshop in a couple of weeks. So we're going to be doing watercolors in nature in Colorado. So
fantastic.
Sign up. You can come and see that. Yeah, that would be cool.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. This has been a really, really nice way to spend the afternoon. So we'll see you again soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Danny. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Danny Gregory. I love the way he approaches creativity. It's free, it's all about the process and not the product. It's full of humor and silliness, and it really asks us to take ourselves and our art a little less seriously and just play, let go of fears and let go of worries. And I think this is exactly what we all need to do. I've put links to Danny's website, his books, his podcast, and all that good stuff in the show notes for this episode. I've also put the link that Danny created just for us, which is sketchbookschool.com/Nature Podcast. And this link will allow you to sign up and try out Spark for a week for free to see what you think. I should mention that the school in Sketchbook School is spelt with a K because it's not your normal kind of school. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.